The Koreshanity was a communal utopia based in Estero, Florida, led by a man named Cyrus. This so-called cult is most famous for believing the earth to be hollow and concave. However, whereas most cults are driven by perversion and end in catastrophe, the Koreshanity to this day are viewed rather positively. They intended to call their area of southwest Florida New Jerusalem. This fact is especially significant due to the existing mountain of references, links, and similarities between the west coast of Florida and the various paradises of world mythology. And to those whom it may concern, Joseph Seed, the zealous leader of the fictional Eden's Gate cult in Far Cry 5, was very loosely inspired by Cyrus. Best friends Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, who lived nearby the commune, both spent considerable time interacting with the Koreshans. Before we get started, it should be noted that I do not agree with the Koreshans' proposed shape of the earth, but I think they should be given credit for their attempt to challenge the faulty Copernican model. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect my own. Now enjoy.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Introducing Dr. Narco Longo.
Good work, Mackenzie. Thank you. Deep in the woods of Estero are hidden relics outlining the mysterious past of a once thriving community. These days, all that's left are just these kind of eerie, empty buildings and some abandoned homes.
These are all footprints of a bizarre, cult-like group that once called this area home more than 100 years ago. ABC 7's Kristen Clark is pulling back the curtain this morning on a local legend that turns out to be true.
Here at Koreshan State Park, it's a beautiful place to go hiking, camping, and just enjoy the great outdoors of Florida. But what many people don't know is that it used to be home to a religious utopian community.
You come down here and you think, well, what an unusual place.
They were most commonly known as the people who believed that we lived inside the earth.
The idea is that the entire universe is encased in a gold sphere, and that humans lived inside. They lived along the inner curve of the earth, looking toward the heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars.
Welcome to Koreshan State Park.
You're stepping back into the 1800s when a group of people came here from Chicago to found a settlement, a place where they could be in paradise.
Cyrus brought his followers to Estero in 1894 to make a new Jerusalem for his new faith, Koreshanity. Take a walk around and you'll see that almost all of the original buildings are still there.
This right here, this is the founder's house.
Which is where Master Koresh lived with his female counterpart, Victoria Gracia.
When he had his divine vision, the divine motherhood goddess told him that he would find somebody and she would inhabit her when the time was right.
He believed she embodied the female version of God and was destined to be his successor.
They practiced celibacy, and they believed that celibacy was the key to immortality, so that if they could be celibate and harness that energy, that would allow them to live forever.
Keep walking and you'll see the planetary court.
This was the house where the planetary council lived.
Where women lived in much better conditions than most men in the 1800s. Equality was important to them.
The planetary council was a group of 7 women who basically ran the settlement.
Everywhere else in America, women couldn't even vote until 1920. But here,
They were all in favor of women getting the vote.
there's much more to be said about this group. But their story comes to an end when Master Koresh died. They put him in a zinc bathtub and waited. He told them that he'd resurrect in 3 days. He didn't, and the rest of the Koreshans died off too because they were celibate.
Just how did this controversial group on a quest for utopia get their start? It all began with an illumination.
As a young physician working in Utica, New York, Dr. Cyrus Reed Teed was always interested in unconventional experiments, often involving dangerously high levels of electricity. In the autumn of 1869, during one such experiment, he was badly shocked and knocked out. While unconscious, Teed claimed to have had a vision. Teed claimed to have seen God in the form of a beautiful woman and to have learned the secrets of the universe: reincarnation, a mother-father God, equity for women, celibacy, and communal living, combined with the belief that the earth was a hollow sphere and we lived on the inside. These would become the cornerstone of Cyrus Teed's religion. Inspired by his vision and the universal truths that he believed were revealed, Dr. Teed vowed to use his knowledge to, as he put it, redeem humanity.
He really considered himself as a prophet. Some people said, oh, he thought he was a Messiah. But you break down Messiah, and it's a leader or a prophet.
Teed adopted the name Koresh, which is Hebrew for Cyrus, named his religion Koreshanity, and started on his quest for utopia.
In the post-Civil War United States, there were many changes taking place. We were becoming an industrial society, and we were becoming an urban society. People were looking for a better thing, and the Koreshan movement wasn't the only one. There were a number of very similar movements that took place during that era. So really the people were looking for something better, and the Koreshans offered them that.
Towards the end of the 19th century, there were great changes in the way people viewed the world. So people were searching, and it's clear from some of the statements that the Koreshans made and the members of the movement made, they were looking for a new way to view reality and to understand where they were, who they were.
To support his wife and son, Teed continued to practice medicine and give lectures, but he would spend almost 2 decades trying and failing to establish Koreshan communities throughout New York State. Then an 1886 trip to lecture in Chicago would change everything. In Chicago, lecturing for a National Association of Mental Sciences convention, Teed finally found some fertile ground to plant the seeds for Koreshanity. Before the week was out, the group elected Teed their president, and he relocated to Chicago. In Chicago, Teed was a popular lecturer and gained some loyal followers. Over the next 8 years, the Chicago Koreshan group would at times boast more than 120 members, and other Koreshan communities were even founded in San Francisco. The Koreshans' beliefs and lifestyles were often not understood or tolerated by mainstream Americans, and everywhere the groups cropped up, they were met with opposition.
Dr. Teed had an uncanny attraction for women, and he was sued by several spouses for alienation of affection, and there were several women who joined the commune that their husbands did not.
And a lot of people at that time were searching for other groups or colonies. I don't like to use the word cult, but something that would add more meaning to their lives.
By 1894, under growing criticism and increased scrutiny, they chose to leave Chicago. The Koreshans left in search of the New Jerusalem, revealed to Teed during his illumination.
So he went out looking for land that he could build this New Jerusalem that was pretty much uninhabited.
That search led Teed to southwest Florida, where he purchased approximately 300 acres in the small trail town of Estero.
For the first 2 years, they were basically clearing land, living in tents, sleeping on the ground in mud, and surviving on peanuts, and it had to be very, very rough for these people. But by about 1904, they were up to about 50 buildings, and they were a full, thriving community.
With creature comforts taken care of, the task of fully outfitting their New Jerusalem was at hand. Teed wanted to construct the city of God that ushered in the millennium of peace on earth. He had visions of this utopia becoming a city of 10 million people.
He also thought that he was going to be the new Christ and that they would all be immortal. So he would have this big, big city that he would reign over.
He thought it was going to be the ultimate utopian society, and he anticipated it was going to be very large and very well received. He wanted the 10 million people. He had excellent plans that were way above or way ahead of his time. But the big thing was he wanted people to come and to enjoy this utopia. And of course, he wanted to lead everything and be totally in charge.
May we so unite our energies as to build for ourselves and for those who may be influenced by our own united efforts and the achievement of collective joys, a habitation in which spiritual, moral, and social unity shall prevail.
The Koreshans bought a sawmill, established a post office, added a bakery, a general store, a concrete plant, and launched their own printing shop and newspaper.
They started building, they built planetary courts, they built little homes.
The Koreshan compound even boasted the area's first school, and for a time, neighboring children attended right alongside the Koreshans.
He believed in a core value of education in the arts, in the culture.
My grandmother told me that education was very important. All the children received schooling. They were all required to speak correct English and use the proper grammar.
Arts, education, and culture were pillars of Teed's tenets, and members would spend their evenings entertaining one another with readings and recitals.
Koreshans had the first symphony orchestra in the area. The music they played, the music that they presented was really quite unique. They also had a concert band that went out and about the area and performed at different activities, and it was very well received.
The Koreshans brought in music, musicals, plays, and these are things that the local people hadn't really seen before. So they enjoyed that. They were allowed to go there.
At first blush, the Estero Koreshan compound seemed like any other thriving pioneer village of the time. But, based again on Teed's illumination, Koreshans believed in an unusual theory of the physical universe, cellular cosmogony, also called the hollow earth theory.
Our visible sun is only a reflection, as is the moon, with the stars reflecting off 7 mercurial disks that float in the sphere's center. The Earth's shell is 100 miles thick and has 17 layers. Inside the shell, there is life. Outside, a void.
As part of the cultural activities in the community, my grandmother said that the evening meals were always formal, always white tablecloths. Tables were set with linen and china and crystal.
The Koreshans were composed largely of middle class and upper middle class people, at least initially. People who had money, people who had education, and most of them were women.
Koreshanity also operated under the then almost unheard of belief of equal rights for women.
Koresh actually believed that God was a male-female entity. He took a co-leader by the name of Victoria, and then the group elected 7 women to run the entire Unity's affairs. And basically how they came up with these numbers, he was heavily into astronomy, so Koresh felt that he represented the sun, Victoria represented the moon, and these 7 women represented the 7 known planets of the zodiac at that time.
The 7 planetary sisters actually ran the Koreshanity, and they lived in the planetary court. It was a special house that was built for them to stay in, but they had to have male counterparts to meet with the public because the public would not accept the women as their people to deal with. So that basically was a kind of a double standard, but the women did run it.
And these were people who were, again, looking for a new way to live their lives, to view the world, and in many ways they were quite radical. They rejected traditional religious views and they rejected traditional economic views.
When people came to join them, they had to go through a trial period, then they had to give Teed and the commune, the corporation, their physical goods and material goods, and then he would take care of them for the rest of their lives.
Despite attacks and criticisms by neighboring non-believers, the Estero Koreshan compound flourished through the turn of the century.
And the people that lived here, I think they were a little afraid of them at first. And as they got to know them, they really didn't approve of them. They thought they were a sect.
By 1903, the Estero compound was home to more than 200 members. The early 1900s were considered the Koreshans' golden years, but by 1906 the group would start a slow but steady decline.
In the beginning, the Koreshans had a very good relationship with the community, Fort Myers in particular. They interacted quite a bit. In 1906, Teed decided to incorporate the city of Estero and therefore deprive some tax revenues from the town of Fort Myers. And that's when the relationship between the community and the unity began to deteriorate.
The Koreshans' foray into local politics quickly became a pot waiting to boil over in controversy.
The local people were resentful of the Koreshans for entering the political field of the community, and they resented the fact that these northerners were coming in and trying to take over, upsetting the apple cart, so to speak.
While they were in Fort Myers, some of the Koreshans got into a discussion that turned into a battle royal, and Dr. Teed came out of his business meeting, and the Koreshan point of view says that he tried to stop the problems. And in my study of Dr. Teed, I felt that he was in there getting his licks in and his 2 cents worth. He was severely beaten by the marshal and his assistant, and really quite badly injured, and he never really did recover from it.
On October 13th, 1906, at a railroad station in Fort Myers, Florida, a man named Cyrus Teed found himself at the wrong end of a town marshal's fist. Cyrus Teed was the charismatic yet controversial leader of a burgeoning turn-of-the-century utopian community known as the Koreshanity. The fight was a result of a political dispute between some local town folks and Teed and some of his followers. Teed was injured and arrested. The case against him eventually dropped, but his injuries from the beating persisted, and as time went on, his condition worsened. That scuffle would eventually lead to Cyrus Teed's death. Cyrus Teed died on the winter solstice, December 22nd, 1908. The events surrounding his death would prove to be almost as bizarre as his life. Holding true to their belief in reincarnation and that Teed was the Messiah, when he died, his followers decided to place their founder and leader in a bathtub to await his resurrection.
When Teed died, my grandmother told me that they gathered the children up and brought them into the room where the body was, and the body was already molding. And they told the children that that was the new life coming out in Teed and that he would soon be resurrected, which of course he wasn't.
Teed's body stayed in that tub for almost a week until the county health officer ordered a burial. Cyrus Teed was eventually properly entombed on December 27, 1908.
When he died, there was an expectation that somehow or other he would resurrect and their beliefs would be confirmed. That didn't happen, and there was a sadness that pervaded the movement because they really lost their leader and they had no idea where they were going or, in fact, where he had gone.
After Cyrus Teed's death,
They put him in an above-ground tomb down Fort Myers Beach. There's little reports of a rowboat being there in case he did rise again. There's reports of standing round-the-clock, 24-hour guard of the tomb. I don't know how long they did that. But there was a hurricane in the 20s that washed him out into the Gulf of Mexico, and we haven't heard from him yet.
Koreshans would eventually meet their demise.
When he didn't rise again, a lot of people were discouraged because they believed fully in everything that he told them.
When they realized that he wasn't coming back, that was mainly the beginning of the end of the Koreshans.
And without his charismatic, strong, disciplined leadership, the lesser angels of human nature began to take over. So there were disputes, and then people left. And then they became defensive. As other people moved down here from other parts of the country, they were looked at as people who were a little bit different.
Without a strong and able successor to Teed, the unity seemed bound for obsolescence. Membership steadily declined and founding members were dying off. By the 1930s and the Great Depression, Teed's dream of the New Jerusalem was fast becoming just that, a dream. During the 1930s, about 36 members sustained the community. It was during this time that some of Southwest Florida's most famous and infamous residents would cross paths. Thomas Alva Edison and Henry Ford both had winter residences in nearby Fort Myers, and the inventor and the industrialist each had their own reasons for heading out to Estero and onto the Koreshan compound.
Edison was the great inventor, and he had his electricity, and he wanted to get it out so it could be used. And the people in Fort Myers were afraid of the electrical situation. They were afraid the cows wouldn't be able to give milk, the chickens wouldn't lay eggs, and they just didn't really trust his invention. And the Koreshans were really very excited about it. They were the type, if it's going to make our life easier, hey, let's do it. And they really were eager, and they said, come on, let's get this out here and see how we can work it into our regular lives, and so they did.
Edison was heavy into bringing in different plants, exotic plants, to Southwest Florida. Some of the bamboo that we have here today came from Edison's estate in Fort Myers that he had given to the Koreshans. They did a lot of trading of seeds, cuttings, plants, and they had public performances there. They had concerts with their orchestra, they had plays, they did their own works, they did Shakespeare. Thomas Edison and his wife, Henry Ford and his wife, and Harvey Firestone and his wife were common attendees to these different performances.
In 1940, with only 35 elderly members of the Koreshan unity remaining, a woman fleeing Nazi Germany named Hedwig Mitchell arrived at the Estero compound. Under her direction, the Koreshans added a restaurant, a Western Union office, and a gas station. But by 1960, with only 4 members left, Mitchell offered the 300-acre Utopia to the state of Florida. Hedwig Mitchell, the last Koreshan, died in her home on the grounds of the Estero compound in 1982. Before her death, during a celebration on her 90th birthday, someone referred to her as the last Koreshan. Reportedly, she defiantly responded with the comment, "There is no last. We shall continue." Today, the state of Florida owns and runs an historic site and campground on 135 acres of the original Koreshan land. What Cyrus Teed started as the Koreshan Unity has, through many incarnations and presidents, become a nonprofit organization called the College of Life Foundation. While no one running the organization today is Koreshan, The College of Life Foundation is the owner and caretaker of the group's extensive archives, as well as 75 acres of land not included in the state park. Those 75 acres are slated for commercial, residential, and cultural development.
What I'd like to see people remember about the Koreshans is that these were people who had a dream, they had hardships, they were led by a very strong man who himself had visions, pictured himself as a prophet, and had enough charisma, enough brains, enough savvy to have people believe in his vision. And what's left of them and their dreams, we're trying to save.
Tucked along the thicketed banks of the Estero River on Florida's southwest coast, glimpses of an unusual pioneer settlement are preserved, reflecting the freedom of religion that is one of our most basic rights and the common human quest for meaning. Glimpses are almost all that remain of a once thriving, self-contained, and often controversial community known as the Koreshans.
But no matter how crazy they may seem,
I think what we can learn is that logic is no match for belief. These people believed some stuff that was clearly unorthodox. It's easy for an outsider to learn about the Koreshans and think, oh, isn't that kooky? Isn't that weird Florida, right? This is not just another weird Florida attraction.
yeah, it's weird, but they can teach us about ourselves, about the power of belief. They're proof that anything can happen if you believe. Facts don't change people. Believing does. In Estero, Kristen Clark, ABC 7.
That's amazing.
It's nuts. I've never heard of this before.
I mean, I passed by there, visited there, but I've never actually done the tour, so fascinating. I had no idea that history, was part of Southwest Florida.
I didn't either. I'm interested. This kind of stuff interests me.
It's very
the history
interesting.
there?
Well, the psychology behind it, the history, wow. It's really incredible. Kristen and Cody, our photojournalist Cody.
They did a great job.
Amazing job, Cody Dunn. All right, it is 9:49.